was to talk to you about variables and simple data types. And I'm going to quickly go through it, right? I talked about print and how print is a specific type of function. And I said, when you see print and then the parentheses, it's essentially literally like you have a pedal to a car, right? But that pedal is not the engine. Everything that's making that car move is not the pedal, but the pedal is, is just a conduit through which you draw power from the engine, right? So usually when you do that in programming, we call that what do you call it now? Encapsulation, abstraction, sorry, abstraction, right? Where all of what drives the system is somewhere else, but then you're using something to call it, right? And usually this is an example of it. And usually so if you go look up print, right? Print might include, it's a whole function that have a bunch of instructions, and those instructions is what makes it such that when you uh, write print, open and close parentheses, right? And you type in anything, it's going to print out that. And so just like we say print hello world, and we have this, right? So that's how it's written, you know. But then we now go to variables, and I did mention the whole thing about variables, where variables are just used to store information. And I gave an example where, for example, you have your name, you have name, age, like a form where you have a form, right? And it has all of those information, name, age, blah, 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 your height, the school you attend. It's collecting all of that information, but that same form, another person can use that form, right, to collect the information. So when you have something like name, age, those things are just variables, right? They are placeholders that help collect information, help store information. That's essentially, and there are different kinds of variables um, that we're going to run into, rather different kinds of data types, but variables. This, for example, I want to store hello world. One way to store it is just to use message, right? And then I get that, and then I use my print function and I print it out, right? So I can store any number of things inside a variable. So the next thing is, now we go into, and I'm not going to belabor this because we did a lot of this last week, when we were working on this. So different types of data types. We did mention that string, for example, is one type of data type. And we said that when you have, notice name, the difference between name and this, right? Right, is when I write out something like this, the way I know that this, because if I remove the quotation marks, all of a sudden it can be confused to be, let's say I have a word ada, right? It can be confused to be a variable. So the way strings work is that you put them in quotation marks, and that creates a distinction between what a variable is and what a string is. And I mentioned that there's something called char in programming, which is character, right? In the English language, you have about 26 characters, right? And any one letter like A, B, C, D, they are all characters. But once we have more than two characters standing side by side with each other, then it becomes what we call a string. And then for a string to be a string, you need to put it in open and close quotation marks, right? And then there are different ways that you can play around with a string. So if you see something like this, right? Dot title, dot upper, dot lower. All of those things are what we call methods. That's different ways in which you can manipulate a string. There are different ways you can manipulate a string. And again, all of this, right, is based on something behind that's been written already. So when you start programming, and that's why it's also like a language. So if you don't have all the vocabularies in a language, you wouldn't be able to speak that language fluently. So that's why I talk about practice, 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 right? As you begin to practice um, um, programming, you would all of a sudden learn different methods. So let me just hypothetically say methods in strings. Let me see if I can. Strings in Python, right? Let me see if we can see. So these are the various methods. If you come here, right, you can see capitalize, case folder. These are different methods to do different kinds of things, join, bind. So we haven't even touched any one of those. We just touched upper, we touched one of those things and all of that. So for example, this is capitalize. Did we use capitalize here? No. So let's go grab capitalize, right? So I come in here and I say something like this. I'll say print, open, name. Name is my variable. So in other words, I'm going here to pick up whatever is here, and then I want to apply a certain operation to it. And sorry, the operation is capitalized, right? Open and close bracket, and then I close this bracket, right? So initially, see what we did when we had title. Remember, like when you go to Microsoft Word and you're trying to, if you're trying to change a text around, you can make it lowercase, uppercase, you can make it title, or you can capitalize it, right? So upper should be similar. Let me just run this code and see how it delivers, right? Title print. Why do I have the string has no attribute called capitalize? Copy. Okay, I think it's copy telize. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4. What's my capitalized function? Convert the first character to uppercase. So that's what capitalize does. Oh, so that's what capitalize does, right? It converts the first character to uppercase. So that is, which is what it does. It has done here. Notice that title, what title does that it capitalizes each of the words. A for Ada, M for Marian, and uh, Kelvin. But what capitalize does, it only capitalizes the first word, and that's what we have done here, right? If we go here and look at, there are any number of ways, right? Things that you can use all of this, but that's my introducing you to different kinds of methods for a string. Any questions though? Questions? Yes, no, maybe. So I did talk about F string. I talked about adding white spaces, all of those things, we talked about them. So I'm just going to quickly go into chapter 3. So my point is, when I ask you to submit like your Jupyter notebook, this is something like this that I'm expecting. And again, if you have any problems about, or you run into any problems about how to go about it, please reach out to me at any time and I would respond to your questions, or I can get on um, MS Team or Zoom to discuss your problems with you. I don't want anyone to not do the work because they don't know what to do or how to do it, right? So, but then I'm going to go to chapter 2 because everything in this place we did last week, right? And also, if you go into that book, you are going to see everything there. So this is a second part, right? And this is about lists. So it says a list is a collection of items in a particular order, right? Unrelated things can be put in a list, like letters of the alphabet, the digits from 0 to 9, or the names of all people in a family. In Python, square brackets, which is your square brackets, indicate a list. So anytime you see a square bracket, you know automatically that that is a list. And the interesting thing about a list is you can put anything inside that list. It could be digits, it could be names, it could be all kinds of things. So it's literally just a collection of items that are put in a particular order. So order is important in a list, right? Order is important in a list. So for example, I say something like bicycles, right? Then I have different strings in here. So another way I can say I can say something like cars, right? And I'm creating, notice me, I've created a list, right? Where I say Toyota, Camry, and I will say Lexus is still Toyota, Mitsubishi, Bushi, and I can say what else? Ford. These are all types of cars, right? So I've created a list of cars, for example. Now, to print it, I will say something like print, and then in brackets, I put my cars. So if I run it all of a sudden, this is what I get. See, I did this and I got this. I did this and I got this, right? So that's exactly what lists are. But then the order of this list is really very important because we're going to, the next step, right, will be for us to now go into indexes or indices, right? And what I mean by that is think of this like a street, right? Let's say this street is called Johnson Street, and then these are houses within that street, right? For me to locate this house, right, I need the address of the house. So the way in programming, the way you address this, the order is you start counting from 0, 1, 2, 3. That's how we count 0, 1, 2, 3. Now, if we do that, right, all of a sudden, what we have is, which is why I'm reading this. So let's just go because I've shown you that addressing system. Or let me go here and also show you this list in Python addressing. I'll show you a typical example of what I mean. So this is, for example, what I mean here, or this, right? Let me see if we open it up. So look at this, right? So this is a list, right? This is a list. So we have biology, and this list, I can decide to call it anything. I can call it something like subjects, right? And I have one, biology, physics, chemistry, math, and computer, right? Maybe this is supposed to be computer science or whatever. Now, the sub list that I have here, so this is because to make it a list, I have to put it in square brackets, right? Sub list is the name of the variable. That's why they say sub list is equals to variable name. Now, there are different positions. Sublist 0, sublist 1, sublist 2, sublist 3, sublist 3. Notice how those numbers are put in quotation marks. So if I want to access biology, right, all I need to do is write the name of the variable and put a quotation, a square bracket and put the position. So look at the positions. Usually in programming, everything starts from 0, right? You go from 0. And the reason why it starts from 0 is, you know how we talk about most things in computers are binary, right? 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. So even for the decimal number systems, decimal number starts with 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 9. And then it recalibrates and starts again at 11, 10, 11, 12 to 19, and then it recalibrates again, right? So that's the binary system. Eventually, when you look at this, right, that's how this starts at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it can go up to any number, right? But then if I want to access whatever is inside this room, right, I will use this address. Access anything that is here, I use this address, and I'll use all of that address, right? So let me go back and show you something else. You also see negative numbering because that's also important. So let me see. Okay, this is another example. Let me use it to, and you can see I'm just getting these things random. So this is negative indexing. So this is when you do positive indexing, you're starting from this point. Look at this list: 3, 4, 6, 10, 8, right? I start from this point: 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But I can also decide to do negative indexing. But when you do negative indexing, you're starting from -1, -2, -3, -4 to that end. So if I decide to use positive indexing to call this, right, I can either say my list, and then I open a square bracket and put 4, and then it would get me to this. Or I can say my list, open and close index, and I use -1, and it will get me to the same place. But don't be confused. Let me do it practically so you can see an example of what I am talking about. So accessing lists, elements in a list. Elements in a list can be accessed by telling Python the position or the index of the element, right? To access an element in a list, write the name of the list followed by the index of the item enclosed in square brackets. So for example, right? Example for the list above. This is the list we have here, right? Let me remove this because I created this. So for the list we have above, right? What you do is you write print, and then the list, which is the name of the list, which is more or less like your variable, and then in the bracket you put the position, and then that's how you get. So but let's do a particular example so that you can see what we mean. So for the bicycle that we were talking about, right, you have trek, canando, red line, and specialized, different kinds of bicycles, for example, right? Specialized bicycles, trek bicycle, blah, blah, blah. That's the example that was used in our reference material, right? So if I want to access a trek, what do? I just come in here, bicycles, which is my variable, put it in square bracket and write 0. If I'm trying to access specialized, I just count 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So let me print 3 so that you can see that's me accessing 3. Then I come in here and I type 3 and I run it. All of a sudden, I've accessed specialized. But what if I want to use negative indexing? Notice that I use 0 to access track. What if I want to access track, right, using negative indexing? All I need to do is I will come in here, you know, and instead of counting 0, 1, 2, 3, I start from here, right? -1, -2, -3, -4. So something like -4 should be able to give me track. So it gives me track, which is the same thing 0 gave me. Any questions though? Questions? Yes, no, maybe.
No
So as
question,
we,
but
yeah,
following.
okay. So even to make it better, notice that all of these are in small case, right? I can also include a method like title here, and all of a sudden it changes that thing, right, to the first letter or character to capital letter. So first of all, I use bicycle, with 0 in it to access the information here, and then that information I now convert it to title. I can do all kinds of things. I can also convert it to uppercase, for example. Even though we know it's all lowercase here, I can now just use something like upper, right? And then I run it. So it gives me the title and it gives me the upper. Make sense? So this just describes what I talked about, right? The positions. So you see the way I've put together the text, right? The notebook. Someone going through it will just understand what's happening. And for your reference, when you want to go back, you can also go back and the same thing, and you are able to access it and understand what's going on. So that's pretty much, of course, we again, from last week, we talked about the F string, right? So let me using F-string can be used to create a message based on a value from a list. So notice this, right? I have my bicycles and I create my list. So I have my list here, right? So I can decide to create an entire sentence using what I just showed us right now, right? Where we are accessing um, particular elements within a list using indices, right? So I just create a variable here, and anything can be a variable name, right? You just write a variable name like message. It could be anything, right? So I write my message here is equals to, I start with my F string, which is F, and then I write my first bicycle was a, and I would try to say what type of bicycle it was, right? And the way you say that is, remember, for you to call a variable using the F string, you have to open up a curly bracket and close the curly bracket. And then inside it, I can bring my bicycles, and then I know I'm trying to access a particular index. I put in that index dot whatever method it is, the way I want to manipulate the content of this, and then I get this, and that's how I got this, right? So I can also decide, you know what, let me do something else. Let me leave that, but this time I want to say, let me make everything uppercase. Instead of title, let me make it uppercase. Upper, right? And then I can also run this. See what my first bicycle was a Trek and I changed it to capital. So that's how you play around with lists. And this thing becomes very important when you now have actual work that you need to do with text and playing around all of this when you go into programming. But the idea here is just to be able to introduce you to some of these little things. So, and as you go through the book, you're going to run into some examples, practice tests. I encourage you to practice with some of those tests because that's what's going to help you get stronger with what you're doing. Make sense? Questions? Questions? Yes, no, maybe. Because if you don't have any questions, we'll continue. Okay, so I'm going to continue with some other things here. Now you can change, you can add or remove elements, right? You can do that. Modifying elements in a list. A syntax for modifying an element is similar to the syntax for accessing an element. So if I want to modify an element here, I can also do that, and I'll show you how you modify it. So watch what's going on here, right? Motorcycle, we created a list for motorcycles, right? Good. Motorcycles, Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, all of that. And we print everything, and that's what we have here. So, and I'll come here, right? But I want to remove this Honda, right? And replace it with something else. How do I do it? And that's how you modify a list. I don't even have to do anything. I don't have to, try to, all I need to do is put something, just think of it like this is a street and these are rooms, or this is a house and these are rooms in that house. If I want to evict the current tenant of this house, right, all I need to do is get the address of that house and then put someone else and that person is gone. That's all that's going on here, right? So notice in the first print of motorcycles, I have Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki. Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki. But when I now introduce Ducati, another type of motorcycle, right? All of a sudden, I print it again. Notice that Honda is gone. And all I needed to do was just put something in its place and the other thing would disappear. Make sense? So if let's assume hypothetically that I wanted to target this guy, the first thing I need to do is I ask myself, what is this address, right? The index for this particular element within the list. I start counting by zero. I start from here, 0, 1, 2. So I just come in here and write 2 instead of 0. Guess what's going to be displayed? Suzuki is what's going to be displaced, right? I run it. Look at Suzuki has been displaced. Or another way of doing this is I do use negative indexing. And when you do negative indexing, you're coming from your right to the left, right? So I start counting -1, -2, -3. So all I need to do is say -1. And once I say -1, the same thing will happen, right? Again, Ducati. Make sense? So that's where we are with that. So I'm going to go back to my 0, and then we are going to run this, right? So how do I add an element to the list? I'm interested in adding an element to the list. In other words, I'm not removing anything, but I want to append something, right, to the list. The simplest way to add a new element to a list is to append the element to the list. That's all you need to do. When you append an item to a list, the new element is added at the end of the list. So order is really very important with list. And when you use the append instruction, so notice that this is a method, right? So all I need to say is I'll say my motorcycles dot append, and then I include whatever it is that I want to append, Wula, and I print it, and all of a sudden, this is my original list, and now this is my new list. That's it. Okay, so the append method makes it easy to build lists dynamically. In other words, at any time I can add any list. For example, you can start with an empty list and then add items to the list using the series of append calls. Using an empty list, let's add the element Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki to the list. So this is an empty list. So we create the list first, and then we can decide to append one by one anytime we want. And then when we print it, we have everything in there, right? So then when it comes to insert is another one. Notice that in append, right? Every time you add an additional element to the list, that element is added at the end of the list, because remember I mentioned that order is really very important in list. But what if I want to insert it in a particular position? I don't want it to be at the end of that, right? What do? I use a method called insert. So the insert method can be used to add a new element at any position in a list, but you have to decide what that position is before it can add. This can be done by specifying the index. How do you do it? You decide on the index of the new element and the value of the new item. So, and once you do that, right, once it enters, the other ones, right, will shift. Their positions will shift. So I'm trying to throw in something between Honda and Yamaha. So first of all, what is the position where I want to put it? Something between Honda and Yamaha is going to be 0, 1, right? So I come in here and I say motorcycles dot insert, and then I open my brackets. The first term, I put in the index where I want the element to be, and then I get the element's name or the value, right? Boom. Once I do that, then all of a sudden Ducati is here. And then notice that Yamaha has lost its position in 1. It has now moved to 2, and then Suzuki has moved to 3. Same thing. And you can also do it in the reverse order, which is important. So what is my reverse order? This is -1, -2, -3. So all I can come here is I can say -3, and then I run it. I will still get the same thing, Ducati in the same position. Sorry, what did I do? Minus -1, -2, -1, -2, -3. No, no, no. So there's something interesting happening here. Let me see. What did I use before? Just 1 minute. Let me just test something and see. -2, -1, -2. No, 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 no. -1, -2. Now this is kind of interesting. Wait, let me go back. What did I do? What did I have before? Undo. Where's my undo button? Undo. Undo. Ducati was 0, I believe. Was it 0 or 1? I think it was 1. Let me run this and see what it gives me. The Ducati is 1, which is 0, 1. So if I'm coming this way, it should be -1, -2. It should be -3. Let me see. It can be used to add a new element at any position in a list. This can be done by specifying the index of the new element and the value. So ideally, this should be, I have to figure out why that's happening, or maybe it's not applicable to insert method. So this is -1, -2. So the next position, oh, I think I see. It's trying to take the position of this, right? I think that's the way they count it. So as you come from here, this is 0, 1, right? So this is the position. So as you come from here, it will be -1, -2. I guess that's why that's, let me see. Let me run that. Yeah, I think that's what's going on. So you land on the specific position where you want to, not what will happen after it's happened. So questions? Any questions? So the next thing we are going to do is removing elements from a list, right? To remove an element, how do I do it? You use del. If the position or index of an item is known, it can be removed from a list using the del statement. So instead of using a method, this time you're using a del statement. In other words, if I want to boot this guy out, I just look for the index where it is, which is 0. I say del, and then I use the variable name, and then I use the index in square brackets, and then I boot it off. So in this case, I want to boot off Honda. Then all of a sudden, this is what we have. So this is the original thing, but when we say del motorcycle, then Honda is gone. If I wanted to boot, or if we use negative indexing again, we're going to say this is -1, -2, -3. So if I use -3 here, you should also boot it out. We should get the same thing here as Yamaha, right? So same thing. So I keep using the negative indexing, right? So that you get comfortable with the idea of negative indexing, because it's important, because sometimes it might be a preferred way of you trying to identify elements within, what do you call it, a list. So we can also remove an element, right, using the pop method, right? So the pop method removes the last item in a list, but it lets you work with that item after removing it. So you can remove it. You know, in other cases, when we remove it, it's gone. But for pop, when you're using pop, you will remove that last element, and then you can now use it to do something else. In other words, it's almost like it removes it, stores it in memory for you. Just think of it, right? Where you go into a Word document, you delete something, but that thing hasn't disappeared. You can now paste it somewhere else, right? That's literally like how pop works. So we go. In a web application, you might want to remove a user from a list of active members and then add that user to a list of inactive members, right? That's a typical example, where, again, just like what I described about, you cut something, you do control X, you cut something from a Word document, and then you go paste it somewhere else. It's gone from where it was, but then it's still stored in memory, and you can put it somewhere else. So this is a typical example. So we have with our motorcycle Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and then we have a motorcycle. So to our popped motorcycle, right? Because this variable is different from this variable, is going to be motorcycle dot pop. So this is a function. And then when you print motorcycle, you get this. And then when you print popped motorcycle, you get the second thing, which is where the Suzuki you when you do this, you've removed this, and at the end of the day, you have this. So you have your motorcycle. After popping this motorcycle, you notice that the last element is gone. That's why we now have these two elements. And then if I just print popped motorcycle, right, this is what I get, right? Which is because it's just that pop, the last thing that you remove from there. Is that confusing? Do you get it, or do you want me to repeat again? Because I'm happy to repeat. Or just take your time and just look at it to see that it makes sense. So essentially what I'm doing today, it's literally like teaching you French if you're not a French speaking person, or teaching you English if you are an English speaking person that doesn't speak French, introducing you to different vocabularies. As you get used to these vocabularies, then you have a rich vocabulary, and it makes you fluent in that language. That's essentially what we are doing. So essentially, I'm introducing you to different vocabularies in this language, right? So look at this. How would this pop method be useful? Imagine that the motorcycle in the list are stored in chronological order according to when we own them. If this is the case, we can use the pop method to print a statement about the last motorcycle we bought. All right, so let's try to use this here. So motorcycle is equals to this a list of motorcycles that I have, right? But then I'm trying to find out what's the list. Let's say this is, I first owned this, then this and this. Maybe I bought this in the year 2000, 2005, and then 2025. I bought the Suzuki. So I'm trying to find out what was the last owned, um, last motorcycle I owned. That's easy. All I need to do is say, I will say last owned. And again, I mentioned that a variable can be any word. It doesn't have to be last owned. It's just anything that you decide to put there, right? Is equals to motorcycle.pop. Now, if I use my F string, which is usually F, open and close quotation marks, and then inside it, I write the sentence I want. The last motorcycle I owned was a. Now, to pick information from the variable, all I need to do is put it in braces, curly braces, and then I'll use my last owned. How did I get my last owned? This is my last owned, right? Because it's going to pop off the last thing there, and then I use a method called dot title to make the first letter capital, right? And that's how I got Suzuki, even though Suzuki is lowercase here. The last motorcycle I owned was a Suzuki. Make sense? So now, remember when I use popped.pop equation method, all I'm doing is I'm using pop only works for the last element in a list. What if I want to pop off items from any location that I want, right? Right? So technically the default here, right? In other words, what would have been inside here? The default is, oh, just go deal with the last element. But if I'm trying to be strategic to pick a particular element in any position I want, then that's where I would now put the position index inside the parentheses, right, of pop. So motorcycle is Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, right? So my first owned vehicle is equals to, and I say motorcycle popped two. Why did I use two? Where did I get these two from? Is 0, 1, 2. That's why. If I was targeting Yamaha, right? Um, if I was targeting Yamaha, right, I would say my first owned motorcycle, which is this, will be 0. Let me just go and say 0, right? And then I run this. If I run this, boom, I get that my first owned motorcycle was a Honda, right? So if I want my second owned motorcycle, I will just create. Okay, let me just actually create that and say my second owned, right? My second owned is the index is 1, right? And I'll change it to second owned motorcycle is this, and then I copy this and I modify it too, because now I have to call second owned, right? I have to call second here, right? Motorcycle, boom. So my the second motorcycle I owned was whatever it is, right? And I know the position. The second one is Yamaha, so I can notice this. The first line tells me my first owned. Now the second line is going to give me my second owned. Does that resonate with you? So essentially, and I can decide to do my third owned, right? And I do the same thing. I come here and I say my third owned motorcycle and I change it to 2 and I change this to third. Yeah, and then I come here and I modify it a little bit to do the same thing. My third own motorcycle was a third. And then I run this. What am I missing? What error? I made a mistake. The third owned, third motorcycle, third owned motorcycle. Somebody help me. So look at it. You know why it said it's out of range? Because each time you pop up something, right, that thing is gone. So that's why it's telling me it's out of range because there's nothing there left. Make sense? Are you with me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and that's why it's also giving this error. So, because each time you pop off that thing, I didn't even think about that, right? It disappears. So let me run this, go back. I need to remove all of this. When you pop off something, it's like you go to your Word document and then you cut. When you come back to go reuse that thing, it's no longer there again, it's gone. So that's essentially what pop does. So then removing an item by value, right? We can also remove an item. Use the remove method when you don't know the position of the value you want to remove, but you do know the value, right? You don't know the position. Let's say we have a list that is 1,000 words. You really don't know what the position is, but you do know what it is that you want to. That's when you use dot remove. Remember in the other case, right? If you know the position, you can use del, right? But then if you don't know the position, that's when you use remove dot remove, and then you can say motorcycle dot remove, and then you just say the name, and then it will just remove it, and this is it being removed. So I think we are going to kind of stop here because technically we have finished chapter 2 and 3. So it will be you to just go do the same thing I've done. Make sure you're doing chapter 1, read through chapter 1, and then for the Jupyter notebook, you're going to have to do chapter 2, chapter 3, and chapter 4 because we'll be doing chapter 4 next week. And our goal will be to go through all of that book, get to a point where you would have enough understanding of what's going on to be able to start doing some assignments. Questions? Any questions?
No question. Actually, it's my first class for me, so um,
That's your first class.
yes,
So
yeah. I
question,
missed last week class, so it's good. No question today.
okay, so the question I would ask you
Good evening, sir.
is, hello.
Yeah,
Yes.
So the
I'm Peter Fondo. David Dennis is also my first class to attend today. I just have a small request.
yeah,
I just want to plead if the video recording for the first class can be posted on the classroom so that we can try to follow up to catch up with the previous lesson.